be talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Rare Sunday afternoon edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great Labor Day weekend. And hope everybody enjoyed that first full Saturday of the college football season. Listen, bottom line, there was no perfect time to do the week one recap. So I figured, what the heck? It's Sunday. Many of you are sitting around. You're waiting for this USC LSU game. So we are going to react to everything from the first Saturday of college football. Going to talk a little bit about that Florida-Miami game. I did a quick reaction right after, but I'll tell you, more stuff has come out since. We'll talk about Billy Napier's future, but also the future of the Miami Hurricanes, who look right now very much like the best team in the ACC. Know who doesn't look like the best team in the ACC? Clemson. We'll talk about them. They get destroyed by Georgia. And again, we've done the Dabo conversation, but I think this takes on a new twist, as it is obvious that they are nowhere near the rest of the top end of college football where they once were. We'll talk a little bit about Notre Dame beating Texas A&M. We'll talk a little bit about some other intriguing results from Saturday. Penn State actually looking half decent on offense. Michigan struggling, Oregon struggling. What about the old SEC, where Alabama puts up a bunch of points, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, etc.? So it was a busy show. By the way, a record-setting night in Tucson, Arizona as well. We're talking about it all. Should mention, by the way, before we get started, we will also be back later this evening, Sunday night, with a post-game LSU-USC recap that you're not going to want to miss. Before we get started, a couple quick things. First of all, make sure you subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. Click that little subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Put on the notifications so you know when we're going live. We will be going live quite a bit here now that the season has begun. Put on the subscribe button so you make sure that you know when we're live. Also, make sure to go to the podcast page. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, full episodes are available of the Aaron Torres Pod. And if you want to do your boy Torres a favor, make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review on the pod page. Oh, and by the way, one more quick thing before we get started. We mentioned it on Thursday's show. I mentioned it in some of Saturday's clips. We have ourselves a new partner, Cauli Puffs, the healthy alternative to snacking in your house. So here's the bottom line. Here's what you need to know. Listen, I am not a parent, but every parent I talk to, every grandparent I talk to, the big issue in your house is we need to find a snack for our kids that they actually like eating, but are actually healthy. And that is where Cauli Puffs comes in, okay? It is a family-owned business not far from where I live. And it's two young parents that started it, no different than me, you, whatever. Had kids looking for a healthy snack, trying to figure out how do we keep them out of the unhealthy, salty, snack food aisles that we all see at the grocery store. So they invented Cauli Puffs, and this is the healthy alternative that also tastes delicious, okay? These things are baked, not fried. They're made with clean ingredients, avocado oil, and you put the, I don't want to say this, I don't want to make it sound bad, but you put these in your mouth. They are absolutely delicious. They sent us a full box. Torres family tore them apart. Mrs. T, Aaron, myself, the dog had a few. They are incredible. Cauli Puffs, they are the healthy alternative. You're going to love them, and you should go ahead and check them out. Visit CauliPuffs.com. That's CAULI Puffs.com. They're also available on Amazon. So you're on Amazon shopping for whatever, new tires, toilet paper, whatever you're shopping for on Amazon.com, throw a few of these in your cart, try them out. I promise you'll love them. They're the healthy alternative, not only for you, your kids, your grandkids, but for everybody in the house. CauliPuffs.com. We appreciate their support, and they are going to be with us for a very long time. With that said, We're like 5 minutes into the show. I have rambled on for too long. There is no more time to waste. So let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, you don't need me to tell you, college football. It's back, baby. And I know we did the full Thursday night recap. Colorado, North Dakota State, Arkansas putting up 70. But it just felt good Saturday, waking up morning, noon, and night and having football on the screen all day long. We could start in a lot of different places, but listen, to me, I think the most important place to start is in Gainesville, Florida. Florida Gators hosting the Miami Hurricanes. Miami was actually a 2.5-point favorite, and I should have probably known there were going to be some issues in this game when Todd Furman, a buddy of mine, a gambling expert and insider in Las Vegas, said that early Saturday morning, all the professional money was coming in on the Miami Hurricanes. Well, the Hurricane landed at Gainesville, baby, and it was ugly. Final score, 41-17. And I'll be blunt, we got to talk some big picture issues with Billy Napier. So you look at this game, and listen, bottom line is we've talked all offseason about the Florida Gators. We know what's at stake for this program in year 3 under Billy Napier. But to me, I thought Saturday was such a crucial game for this program because the bottom line is we know how tough the schedule is on the back end. Texas on the road, Georgia on a neutral, Ole Miss at home, LSU at home. And so to me, I didn't think it was even necessarily like you had to beat Miami, but I thought you had to absolutely put forth an excellent performance, right? If you lose on a walk-off field goal and it's an all-time classic, like that's okay. But to the credit of Florida fans, and they deserve credit, they showed out, they were loud, and the one thing you could not do was just lay an absolute egg because ultimately you do wonder, what is the enthusiasm or excitement for Florida fans to show up at the building, show up at the Swamp over the course of the rest of the year? So it was a huge game from not only a win-loss perspective, but a perception perspective. And that's what made the final result that much more disastrous as Miami just does whatever they want against Florida. When I look at this loss, couple things stand out. Where you have to be concerned if you're a Florida fan, where you have to be concerned if you're the Napier family and you don't want to get up and move after this season. This game from a talent perspective wasn't even competitive. I think that's the scary part if you're a Florida fan. Now, maybe Miami's a little bit better than we all thought. I had them winning the ACC. But even if they're way better than we thought, it wasn't even close. It looked like an FBS team versus an FCS team in week 1. And Florida's the home team. They're supposed to be SEC caliber. And instead, Miami at every single spot, bigger, faster, more athletic, I would argue tougher, which is kind of a sad thing if you're a Florida Gators fan. And they absolutely run all over them. 580 yards of total offense for the Miami Hurricanes in this game. Let me make sure and double check that stat. 529. Okay, so I apologize. 529 yards for the Miami Hurricanes. Florida, how about this? 261 yards of total offense. And 71 of those yards came in the first half of that game. So it's not like we're talking about, it was even. No. It was over basically like middle of the second quarter on. And again, of all of your offense, like this thing basically was done by halftime because Miami jumps out to the early lead. Florida has that big run, and immediately Miami comes back down and scores. So it wasn't even competitive. It wasn't close. The two teams did not look equal. But here's the scary part. Here's the worst part if you're a Florida fan. And this is where my criticism time and time again of Billy Napier comes in, is that Florida, it's not only that you lost, it's that all the same problems that have plagued this program time and time again showed up at the worst possible times. Jesse Palmer talked about it during the broadcast. You watch this game, Florida, just look at it's the little things. It's not the complicated things. It's the little things. Yes, you're not good enough, but beyond that, opening drive, you're about to hold Miami to a field goal. Dumb penalty, late hit on the quarterback. They get a new set of downs. They score a touchdown. You score on that Montrell Johnson run to cut the lead at that point to what we thought was a respectable 17-10 score. Miami gets the ball back with 3 minutes to go. You think they're just going to run out the clock. Then again, another dumb penalty gives them a first down, and all of a sudden it's now 24-10 going into halftime, and they're getting the ball back. So you're not good enough, but you're also beating yourself, and that's where we have to talk about Billy Napier's future. Now, I know it's only week 1, but you look at what's going on at Florida, and in my opinion, there's a couple of reasons to think that this thing ain't going to get better. First off, and this is, again, to me, the I don't want to say the most shocking part, but if you're Billy Napier, here's where the issue comes in. It's year 3 for you, but it's also year 3 for Mario Cristobal. So, where is the argument if you're Billy Napier that somehow you need more time or this is all a process? Those are his favorite words, right? Our process, our organization, we're this, we're that. No. Mario Cristobal's got a process too, and that process is kicking your butt. Because whatever you think about Mario Cristobal on game day, his team was prepared, they were physical, they were tough, and they were just flat out better. So it's year 3 for you, but it's year 3 for him too, and his program is leaps and bounds better than yours. And you can't tell me that Miami has better NIL or better this or better that. They're just doing it at a higher level than you right now. Beyond that, if you're a Florida fan or if you're trying to defend Billy Napier, you look at the schedule. Listen, we'll talk about what Napier has to do to keep his job, but look at the schedule. Where are the wins if you're a Florida fan? Because if you beat Miami on opening night, then you start to talk yourself into, well, Florida State's a little bit down. And Texas A&M, now they lost to Notre Dame. Maybe they're not as good as we thought. And UCF, they're good, but they're not on our level. Instead, you get destroyed by Miami, and all of a sudden you look around, I don't know where you find the wins. Sanford next week, okay. But then you have Texas A&M in 2 weeks. Texas A&M was at least tough and physical. Connor Wigman wasn't very good. We're going to talk about A&M in a minute. But at least A&M, you could see the difference in toughness and on their defense. Maybe that's a win, but it doesn't feel guaranteed by any stretch at home. Central Florida in a couple weeks, UCF. They put up a bunch of points. Gus Malzahn knows how to put the ball in the end zone, something Billy Napier hasn't proven an ability to do. And then that's the easy part of the schedule. From there, you have at Tennessee. Kentucky isn't a gimme. You lost to Kentucky 3 years in a row, so don't tell me that Kentucky's a win on the schedule. At Mississippi State should be a win, but Mississippi State, that building is tough to play in. And then, of course, you have the backstretch of the schedule where you have Georgia, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and, of course, Florida State to wrap the season. All 5 of those games feature teams that were in the top 15 to start the season. And so when you look at Billy Napier's future, listen, I've said it regularly all offseason. I do think 6-6 would save his job because I think there's a couple things working in his favor. One, I think even Florida fans that are kind of over his crap are like, dude, we don't want to start over. You know, what is it? 4 head coaches since Urban Meyer left. You know, Will Muschamp doesn't work out. Jim McElwain doesn't work out. Dan Mullen doesn't work out. By the way, Dan Mullen tweeting up a storm. But the issue for Florida is you got to get to 6-6, and I don't see where the wins are. By the way, there's another thing working in Billy Napier's favor that's maybe been a little bit underreported. So producer Matt, pop up the tweet that I had on Saturday afternoon, because I kind of said it half jokingly, but kind of not. The bad news for Florida, Billy Napier's buyout is $26 million. So that's another reason why in their heart of hearts, I think Florida nobody wants to pay $26 million to get rid of a coach when you're going to have to probably pay another $100 million to get a good one in his place. But the other thing, and this is important, Scott Strickland, the AD, has hired the last 2 football coaches. Didn't work with Dan Mullen, even though in hindsight, Dan Mullen was clearly better than we gave him credit for. And it's not working with Billy Napier. So thank you, producer Matt, for that. But the funny thing is, and I'll tell you, I knew this, but Florida fans were quick to mention it to me. The thing about Florida right now, there's kind of some uncertainty in not just the entire athletic department, but at the entire school. And so Billy Napier weirdly has some politics working in his favor where the school president is an intern. And so ultimately, I think most Florida fans understand if you're going to fire Billy Napier, you probably have to fire the AD as well. SEC ADs don't get 3 shots at hiring the right football coach. But with an interim AD, you sit there and say, well, wait a second now. Interim AD, interim school president, is that guy really going to want to clean house at 2 of the most high-profile positions at his school, athletic director and football coach? I don't think an intern wants to do that. I think an intern's hoping you're good enough where I don't have to worry about it. I got enough on my plate. I'm trying to run a major university. So you look at that situation, it should work out in Billy Napier's favor. Because on the one hand, you either have an intern that doesn't want to do it, or 2, the school president gets in place probably sometime in late October, early November, and that guy or girl's only going to be on the job for a couple weeks by the time the season is done. So Billy Napier actually has a couple things working in his favor where, again, I just think if you get to 6-6, if you get to a bowl game, if you show any level of positive momentum, I think you got to feel pretty good that you're keeping your job, that they're giving you at least one more year into year 4. But ultimately, once again, and I'll be quick because I know I just said it, look at the schedule. A&M, you beat Miami, all of a sudden A&M maybe feels like a win. That doesn't feel like a win to me. Not after what I saw on Saturday. A&M, like I said, is at least tough and physical along the line of scrimmage. Kentucky's not a win. Kentucky's beaten you 3 times in a row. Tennessee's not a win, tell you that. I don't think Mississippi State on the road is a guarantee. And then again, you get to that back half with Georgia and Texas, LSU and Ole Miss, on and on. So from the Florida perspective, it was a complete disaster. And again, Billy Napier, you didn't have to be great. You just couldn't be terrible. And you were kind of terrible on Saturday. I don't know what to say if you're a Florida fan. Listen, I'm not one of these people that's like, I don't talk about another man's job. Because if you stink at your job, I'm going to call you out on it because people call me out telling me I'm terrible every day. Well, guess what, Billy Napier, you are just not good enough right now. That's got to change in a hurry. By the way, producer Matt chiming in. Producer Matt, for people who don't know, behind the scenes, is an Auburn alum. He's saying Florida is in its Brian Harsin era right now. So not the positive reinforcement you want if you're a Florida fan, but what a freaking debacle. And again, I don't see where I just don't see where the wins are. Just show me the wins. Like, we got Kentucky fans that love this show. Kentucky fans know Kentucky owns Florida right now. By the way, Florida, I'd also add, probably a victim of no divisions because, of course, there's no Vanderbilt. There's no South Carolina on the schedule. I was going to say those are probably the 2 worst teams in the SEC, but at least Vanderbilt picked up a solid win on Saturday against Virginia Tech. South Carolina, I think, just stinks. But Florida, victim of the schedule of no divisions because, of course, both those teams are off the schedule. Really quickly, listen, if we're going to criticize Florida, and I believe they deserve absolute positive criticism, we have to go ahead and give some flowers to Mario Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes. And listen, I'll be honest, I picked Miami to win the ACC, be the number 3 seed in the college football playoff. But as good as I thought they would be, I did not expect to see what I saw on Saturday in terms of the dominant manner in which they won that game. You look at Miami. First of all, listen, people want to criticize Mario Cristobal. I get it. He's had some weird stuff happen on game day. You cannot deny that this man, though, whether you love him on game day, hate him on game day, this man knows how to put together a championship caliber roster, okay? I always say the stat, last 3 years at Oregon, 3 Pac-12 championship games. By the way, it's worth noting the 2019-2021 seasons, they went into November with a chance to make the college football playoff. So he knows how to put together a roster. And that Miami roster, listen, I don't think Florida's good, but you start stacking up Miami, there's not many teams that look like Miami on the field. The ones that do, we know who they are. Georgia, Alabama, maybe Ohio State, obviously probably Ohio State, maybe Penn State, who we'll talk about in a little bit, but there aren't very many. And that's a testament to Mario Cristobal. I think it's also worth noting, by the way, Cam Ward is a game changer, man. And listen, I'm a Cam Ward guy. I thought he was the best quarterback in the portal. I actually didn't even think there was a debate, to be honest. Credit Mario Cristobal for getting this thing done, man, and his staff, because remember, Cam Ward, the assumption was he was going into the NFL draft, and then we see that tweet that pops up, Cam Ward's committed to Miami, and it's like, Mario Cristobal is the first guy to ever out-recruit the NFL. Like Cam Ward was to the NFL, gone, decides to come back, and not only had a phenomenal performance on Saturday, 385 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. I think what impressed me most about him was the fact that he just stayed poised. He had that early interception. You think, oh, here comes Cam Ward, the guy that turns the ball over quite a bit. We talked about the stat, 40 plus fumbles in his 4 years as a college football quarterback. Now, he didn't lose all of those fumbles, but that's still a crap ton of fumbles. But I bring it up because he stayed poised. Again, 385 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, also had 33 yards rushing. He brings a whole new dimension to that team. And so you look at that team and you start to look at that schedule. I'm sorry. It is hard to find the scenario where Miami is not the overwhelming favorite in the ACC right now. First of all, a couple scheduling breaks. They don't play Clemson. As critical as I will be of Clemson in just a few minutes here, I think they deserve credit. I still think Clemson's probably the second best team in the SEC, in the ACC, excuse me. Well, that ain't going to be an issue. Clemson ain't on the schedule. So no Clemson. You get Florida State at home. Virginia Tech, who was kind of that trendy team that people felt like, okay, they could be a surprise in the ACC. Just referenced it. They got beat by Vanderbilt on Saturday in Nashville. So that's probably not a team that is as good as we expected. And then you look at the back half of the schedule. I mean, even if you think somebody like a Louisville is a threat or is maybe better than we expect, that's still, I mean, listen, they'll probably get tripped up somewhere because most teams don't finish regular seasons undefeated, even in bad conferences. But you start to look at the schedule, it's hard to find the scenario where this team has 2-3 losses at the end of the season. I think it's I think it's almost certain they're in the ACC championship game because, again, no Clemson on the schedule, get a couple nice breaks, Florida State at home. But 2, I think it's possible that they are competing, as crazy as it sounds, for that number 1 overall seed. Remember, you finish 13-0 in the ACC, you're in the conversation for that number 1 seed. No, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but it's hard to find the losses on the schedule with the way this team looked. I think they are definitely the best team in the ACC. And credit Miami, man, because I thought they would be good. Did not think they would be as good as they looked. All right, tell you what, this is what we're going to do. Go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the rest of the weekend that was in college football. We'll talk Clemson getting boat raced. We'll talk Texas A&M, Notre Dame. We'll talk some of the other big results. I see a couple questions about the Kentucky game. The late kick was about a 10:15 Eastern time kick. Tell you what, we'll take a quick break. Be right back. Talk the rest of the weekend in college football. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Maura Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions Aaron Torres podcast questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. Good to be back. And I'll say this. Was talking to producer Matt the other day. It's so good to just have real college football, like real stuff to react to. Listen, I love what I do, bless what I do. But really, since March Madness, there hasn't been like that rush of something has just happened and we got to dive in and we got to talk about it right away. And there's so much to discuss. And I love portal season and I love the off season, but it feels good to have a lot to talk about. Speaking of a lot to talk about, there is a lot to talk about with the Clemson Tigers because Clemson on Saturday played Georgia. This was one of two top 25 matchups in the sport of college football on Saturday. The other one was A&M and Notre Dame. We'll get to that in a minute. But in terms of Georgia Clemson, listen, we talked about it all offseason. The fact that it was a noon kickoff. I mean, this would have been a few years ago a primetime game that everybody had circled on their calendars. The fact that it was a noon kickoff, the fact that Georgia was a 13.5-point favorite coming in, it kind of reflected that both Vegas and the TV networks, they don't think Clemson is what they once were. Well, the game got kicked off, and I hate to be blunt, but not only were they right, not only was Vegas right, not only were the TV networks right, but your boy Torres gets a lot of stuff wrong. Kind of nailed this one. Went exactly as I told you how it would on Tuesday night's pick show as the Georgia Bulldogs run away from the Clemson Tigers. Final score 34-3 in this game. And when I look at this game and I look at this result, sorry, forgive me as I get comfortable here. First of all, I'm going to do something that, isn't very cool right now. I'll give Clemson a half a second of credit here because to their credit, for the first probably quarter and a half of this game, Clemson was every bit the equal of Georgia. They were fast. They were physical. They were tough. They were making plays in space. I think they had Carson Beck a little bit shook. It's kind of funny coming into the game. There was a lot of conversation about Brock Bowers had been Carson Beck's security blanket last year. What was he going to do without him? Well, whether it was the defensive scheme, the pressure, the defensive backs, whatever, Carson Beck was kind of shook, and it felt like there was a half a moment where Clemson had actual momentum, and I don't want to say control, but momentum in the game. Then, unfortunately, Clemson got a really stupid penalty. If you were watching the game, you know what I'm talking about. I think it was late first quarter, maybe early second quarter, but Clemson's driving. It's third and whatever. They hit a deep pass. They hit a big kind of stretch play, whatever. And you think, okay, oh my goodness, Clemson has a little momentum here. It gets called back for an illegal formation. Clemson is forced to punt. And even though they held Georgia to 3 on that possession, you felt like the momentum had kind of gone. You felt like they had a moment, they couldn't capitalize, and it never came back. Still, to Clemson's credit, it was 6-0 at the half. You feel like, okay, maybe they can hang. Unfortunately for Clemson, it is a full 4-quarter, 60-minute game, and the second half just became a debacle. And the second half essentially played out like I told you it would the other day, because you look at Clemson. They were competitive for a half. Then the second half starts, and that Georgia depth, that Georgia experience starts to wear them down. As a matter of fact, producer Matt, go ahead and pop up the tweet that I referenced during the Clemson Georgia game, because if you go back to my week 1 preview, here is what I said about this game, and I'll try to be quick, but it's a long thing. I said Georgia. It's obviously that I like the dogs. I said at the same time, I'm not as down on Dabo as most. I obviously fundamentally disagree with him not using the portal to rebuild his roster, but if his bosses are willing to deal with the consequences, who am I to tell him how to do his job? Except here's the problem with Saturday's game against Georgia. This is from my write-up on Tuesday, my picks column on AaronTorresOnline.com. I said this is the exact game where those consequences come to bear. The bottom line is that Dabo's disinterest in the portal doesn't impact him against Boston College or Wake Forest. His top guys will always be better than their top guys. Where the issue comes in is in games like this, where your top guys are basically the same. Georgia can keep sending waves of fresh bodies at your starters. I believe this game is close for 2.5 quarters, but in the end, Georgia's depth and Clemson's lack thereof is the separator as the Bulldogs pull away late. Georgia 30, Clemson 13. Well, probably gave a little too much credit to the Clemson Tigers because they did not put up 13 points. But that synopsis right there, I'm not saying I get everything right, but that in a nutshell is the problem with Dabo Swinney, his program, and his refusal to use the portal. Listen, you watch that game. Clemson's best players were as good as Georgia's best players. That dude, Peter Woods, former five-star, was everywhere. You look at some of the wide receivers. You looked at the O-line early was able to move Georgia. The TJ Parker, they have dudes at Clemson. The problem is they don't have enough of them. And you just look at Georgia. Georgia late in the game, third string running back, Nate Frazier is running all over him. London Humphreys, a transfer, that four-letter word at Clemson, according to Dabo, from Vanderbilt, has a big receiving touchdown. And to me, that is where I get tripped up with Dabo and his portal stance. What Dabo does not understand, or what he refuses to acknowledge, it's not just about recruiting the elite portal players, okay? Because Dabo's stance, for people who don't really, Dabo's stance on refusing to use the portal. By the way, I think everybody knows the stat. There were only 4 teams that did not take a transfer this offseason in FBS football: Air Force, Navy, Army, Clemson. One of those is not like the other, okay? But at the end of the day, here is the issue. I understand where Dabo's coming from. What he's basically saying is, listen, I am not going to go into the portal because it's disrespectful to the guys that I have recruited to this program. How am I going to go into a kid's house at 17 years old and say that if you come here and you stick with us and you come to school, year 1's going to be like this, year 2's going to be like this, year 3 you're going to be a star, year 4 you're going to be a first-round pick. Okay, I get that. But it's not just about recruiting over your starters. It's about depth, and that's where the issue comes in. You look at Clemson. Everybody's going to lose players in the portal in the offseason. That is part of college football in 2024. Georgia lost 20-plus players last December. Ohio State lost 20-plus players. I don't know how many Clemson lost, but even if it's 10 to 15, you're going to lose those guys. You cannot replace them with freshmen, and if you do, you're going to see the consequences like we saw Saturday. Look at one of the big plays that Georgia had. It was a play where Clemson star linebacker Woody Woodaz, great name, by the way, he's playing. They decide to pull him out. They put a true freshman in his place. Kid gets burned on one play. Boom, Georgia scores a play or two later. That is the issue for Dabo Swinney. It's not just about we got to recruit the best of the best and replace the guys already in the locker room. But you have to have depth. You have to have bodies. You have to have experience, and they just don't. Then you counter it with somebody like Georgia. Like I said, London Humphreys was a transfer from Vanderbilt. He wasn't on any top 100 transfers list. He wasn't a guy that they had to outbid with Alabama and Ohio State and Tennessee to get onto campus. But he fit a spot. He was a guy that was a depth piece. He's not the number 1 receiver. Nobody recruited over him. But instead, he was a guy that was making plays late. The transfer from Stanford at tight end had a couple big plays. That's a kid. He's not starting over Oscar Delp. He's not your first string tight end, but I could go on and on. But Dabo, he's stubborn, and if it doesn't change, it's not going to get better. Because at the end of the day, I understand this is a 12-team playoff era, and I get that Clemson, if they win the ACC, is in that playoff. But 2 things. 1, if you watch Miami, they ain't beating Miami in an ACC championship game, okay? But 2, on top of that, and this is where I think it's important, Clemson isn't judged by the standard of just making a 12-team playoff. It wasn't that long ago. They were Georgia's equal. They were Alabama's equal. They were LSU with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase's near equal. They ain't that anymore, and it isn't even close. And listen, I'm not going to keep going on because everybody knows the Dabo Swinney portal takes, but that was just the game where it gets crystallized. Like I said, like I wrote, it's not about what you do against Wake Forest. It's not what you do against Pitt. It's what you do in the big games. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, Dabo Swinney himself said we got our butts kicked. From the Georgia perspective, listen, I don't think there's really much to add from Georgia. Preseason number 1 team. And to their credit, kind of took their lumps early. Like I said, it wasn't a game where they were perfect early on. struggled early, but part of that is Clemson, their depth, their talent for the Clemson Tigers, or their lack of depth, I should say, but their talent up front. But Georgia's credit, they kind of just stuck with it. I think the only real revelation I have, the Frazier kid was unbelievable. True freshman running back. Trevor Etienne, I'm not saying that he got Wally pipped, but Trevor Etienne was suspended for week 1. He got a DUI in the offseason. I did tweet about that as well. But at the same time, I'll just tell you, Georgia looks as good as advertised. Should be a little bit of an easy game today, or an easy game in a couple weeks, or next week, excuse me, before they do go to Kentucky a few weeks from now. Kentucky has actually played Georgia relatively tough in Lexington the last few times, so I'm excited for that game. Really quickly, let's get to some other results from the weekend. I see Notre Dame fans in the comments chirping, Notre Dame survives against A&M. They were an underdog. How are you going to say survives? Listen, only so much space to put in the title, only so much space to put on the rundown. Forgive me, but let's talk about Notre Dame, Texas A&M. 23-13 is the final score. And let me start by saying this. Great win for Notre Dame. No, it's frustrating for Texas A&M, but this is one, I'll be blunt. I don't know that I really have that many hot takes. We knew Texas A&M would be tougher than they were last year, not tougher than Notre Dame. We knew Texas A&M would be tougher than they were a season ago under Jimbo Fisher. I thought we saw that. The defensive front played excellent, but we also knew they would be facing the best secondary and one of the better defenses they're going to see. I know nobody wants to give Notre Dame credit for anything. They got All-Americans, especially in that defensive secondary. Up front, they're good. This is a really talented Notre Dame team. And so it's a great win for Notre Dame. And I actually want to spend just a minute talking Notre Dame because I do think this game and this win is probably a little bit bigger than maybe you realize in the moment, okay? So when I look at this Notre Dame win, it's big for a couple of reasons. First of all, there is the perception. I'm not saying Texas A&M is the best team in the SEC or the second best team in the SEC. I'm not saying they're better than Georgia, Bama, Ole Miss, whoever. But at the same time, Notre Dame, this was kind of a wild stat. They have not beaten a ranked SEC team on the road since 2004, okay? 20 years ago, they beat Tennessee at Tennessee, but that is the last time that they beat a ranked SEC team on the road. So one, that's just a perception win. We can criticize, we can talk about whatever, we can talk about how good is A&M going to be, this and that. They're not one of the best teams in the SEC. Are they not? I think they're maybe going to be a little bit better than people think, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still a good win. But I'll also say this. I do think it's a more important win than maybe we realize because of the fact that Notre Dame's schedule isn't great. Okay, we all know that. But Notre Dame's toughest games left on the schedule as of right now, Florida State at home in November. You have USC to close the regular season. Now, we are recording here before the USC LSU game, so I don't know if LSU is or if USC is going to win. I think they at least cover. I think it's a close game. But I just bring it up because there's a possibility that if LSU beats up USC pretty bad, that Notre Dame doesn't have a single ranked team left on the schedule going into week 2. I think Florida State might fall at the top 25. USC will certainly fall at the top 25 with a loss. And so for Notre Dame, this was a big win, not only from the perception, not only sell recruits, hey, we go into SEC stadiums and win, but because they're not going to have a lot of marquee opportunities left on the schedule to show everybody how good they are. And so to me, I think there's this notion, right? We have this 12-team college football playoff. And I think there's this notion, everybody's going to get in, and the SEC gets 5, and the Big Ten gets 4, and Notre Dame's going to have a spot every year that they're half decent. It's like you start actually breaking it down. There's not as many spots as you think. And there's going to be good, not great, but good teams that are left out of that 12-team playoff. And so why this win for Notre Dame is important is because if they lose this one, and let's say they lose another one somewhere along the way, it's going to be hard to find those great wins on the schedule. Then you start comparing them to a 10-2 Penn State. All of a sudden, that resume maybe doesn't look as good. Compare them to a 10-2 Ole Miss. All of a sudden, that resume maybe doesn't look as good. By the way, You lose this game, now you're talking about a situation where you're being compared with other teams in the SEC that are playing Texas A&M. Look at Texas A&M's schedule. A couple weeks from now, first week of October, they host Missouri. What if you're Notre Dame and you lose this game and Missouri goes into College Station and gets the win? What if you lose this game and Texas closes the regular season with a win at Texas A&M and you lost? And so all of a sudden you're talking about matching resumes. You got to go win for win, but you also will have a common opponent. And these aren't things that have necessarily mattered in the 14 playoff era, but I absolutely think that they are going to matter in the 12-team playoff era. And so for Notre Dame, I was impressed. The defense was even better than I thought. And let me give credit also to this. I was somebody that was questioning the O-line because remember, the O-line lost 4 starters off last year. And then the projected offensive starting left tackle, he went out in fall camp with a season-ending injury as well. Well, against the best defensive front that they'll see all year, and sorry Florida State fans, or sorry Florida State that's trying to sell us they have the best defensive line in college football, Notre Dame finished with 198 yards rushing, 6 yards per carry in that game. And so that was a statement for that offensive line on the road, hot, loud, etc. Excuse me. By the way, Riley Leonard, I thought was a very solid performance for him. We talked a lot about him coming off major injury late last year, did not participate, in spring ball. So credit Notre Dame. They find a way to win. I thought that one was a very impressive win. As I just explained, probably a little bit of a bigger win than or a more important win than maybe a lot of people realize. From the A&M perspective, listen, I know A&M fans are tired of the, we look good on paper, we stink once the games start. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong on this. And A&M fans, if you see this video, if you see this clip, you can get in the comments section and tell me that I'm terrible and I don't know what I'm talking about. This did not feel the same to me. Now, it feels just as disappointing because you were excited. You were a 2.5-point favorite. People expected you to win. You're at home. You don't get the win. But first off, that Notre Dame defense is legit. And I know nobody wants to give Notre Dame credit for anything and blah, 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 and this and that. Watts is an All-American. Watts led the country in interceptions last year. Benjamin Morrison is an All-American. I mean, they have real players on that defense. The front seven is really good. And so I know you're disappointed, and I know you feel like, here we go again. We're headed for another 5-7 season. We never win the games that matter. But I would just say, if I was an A&M fan, use the Aaron Rodgers quote, RELAX, relax. Okay. I know you don't want to hear it from me, but I'm just saying, you look at Texas A&M. Okay. First off, that's probably the best secondary you're going to face all year. There are great defenses in the SEC. I don't know how many of them you're actually playing. Texas maybe to end the year, but you ain't playing Georgia. I would argue Ole Miss's defense is much improved. You ain't playing LSU. You ain't playing Alabama, who's got dudes. You ain't playing Kentucky, who's always tough along the line of scrimmage. You ain't playing Tennessee, who's actually really good along the defensive front. You're not playing the best defenses in this league. You got Florida, who just got bullied by Miami. You got LSU. We'll see what they look like on Sunday night against USC. You got South Carolina, which had to survive Old Dominion. So what I would say is just take a deep breath and get ready for 2 weeks from now. You host McNeese next week. Goes without saying, got to win that one. Obvious. But you go to Florida. Both those teams now desperately need a win for momentum and perception. Go do what you just did. Let that defensive front go crazy. Go crazy on them and limit the run game and take that crowd out of it. Because that Florida crowd, we just talked about it, is looking to flip. They're angry. They're not happy. And so I just look at this situation. I just say, you know what? I don't think it's as bad for A&M. I'm not an A&M fan. So if A&M fans disagree, I get it. But to me, I just don't think this is as bad. It's not as bad as it may feel in the moment. But I understand the frustration of A&M fans. By the way, I see Mike Elko said, you deserve better. We didn't give it to you. I get it. I also think Notre Dame's really good and don't want to discredit what they did as well. Couple other notes from a busy night in college football, okay? We're going to start in a very unique place I wouldn't have expected that we started. But let's give some flowers to what was probably right up there with Travis Hunter on Thursday as the best individual performance of Saturday of week 1 in college football. And that goes to Arizona wide receiver Teto McMillan. Okay. If you're not familiar with this name, we talked about him a lot at this time last year, or really in January of last year, because when Jedd Fisch left off that 10-win season, Arizona had Teto McMillan and Noah Fafita. They were high school teammates, quarterback and wide receiver, and they were dynamic, helped Arizona get to that 10-win season. And when Jedd Fisch left, I think everybody was hoping and wondering and thinking, are those two dudes about to get in the portal? And especially, is Teto McMillan about to get into the portal? Because this is a first-round caliber type talent. Coming off a season a year ago, 1,400 yards receiving, 10 touchdowns. And first of all, it's funny because Jedd Fisch, I guess there's a quote from Noah Fafita's dad where he's like, if Fisch had just been honest with us, we probably would have gone with him to Washington. But Fisch kind of sneaks out the side door. There's this 2-3 day period of Arizona's got to move quick to keep these guys in the program. Well, to the credit of the former AD, Dave Hickey, I should say, they were able to get Brent Brennan. Brent Brennan keeps these guys. And you saw on Saturday why it was so important to keep Teto McMillan, okay? So again, for people who this wasn't on a lot of people's radar, Teto McMillan on Saturday night, 10 catches, as you see on the scroller, 304 yards and 4 touchdowns, okay? 10 catches for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. He was unbelievable. This is a first-round pick. I'm just here to tell you, if you watch Arizona for no other reason, watch the McMillan or watch the Fafita to McMillan combo. It is a thing of beauty. By the way, quick shout out to Mary, who runs our Torres on Arizona account. She was up late. She was at the game. She left the game. She went ahead and put together a little bit of a why am I blanking on what it's called? Why am I blanking? Producer Matt, what's it called where you put the faces on the things? What is it called? Oh, Photoshop. A Photoshop. Did a little bit of a clever Photoshop. Teto McMillan on the Heisman Trophy. I really loved it. I appreciate it. We will see where Teto McMillan ends up in the Heisman conversation. But you talk about in one night, what a performance. Couple other quick results, and we will get out of here. Let's start in the Big Ten. There were some hits and misses by Torres. And I got to give a little credit where it's due, because there has been a program that I have been very critical of and a coach that I was very critical of, and at least for one game, I was actually very pleasantly surprised with what I saw. That's the Penn State Nittany Lions, okay? So if you know my history with Penn State, me and Penn State go back for years, okay? But last year, Final 14 playoff, I had Michigan beating Bama to win the championship in the preseason. I had Florida State out of the ACC, and I had Penn State as an at-large team out of the Big Ten. And a lot of people made fun of me, whatever. I don't really care. But the argument was, well, this Drew Aller kid is special, and the defense is going to be special. Then the games got played. Drew Aller was terrible against Ohio State, terrible against Michigan. They lose both games. They get destroyed by Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl. And I just said, I'm out on Penn State. And so coming into the year, they had a new offensive coordinator, and everybody says, this year's going to be different. And I said, didn't we say that last year? Haven't we said that like 5 times in the last 10 years that this is finally the year Penn State gets over the hump? Well, sometimes I got to take my medicine, and I do want to go ahead and give some quick credit to the Penn State Nittany Lions, who looked really good against West Virginia. They win 34-12 in this game. What stood out? Bottom line is a couple things. One, that defense is still awesome, okay? For people who don't know, West Virginia last year was number 3 nationally in rushing. Penn State held them to 85 total yards, 2 yards per carry. That defense is still as good as it's ever been. But the difference was the offense. Drew Aller actually looked really good. Only 11 of 17 passing, but he had 3 touchdowns. He threw a few absolute darts and dimes. Not a quarterback expert, but when you're threading it over the linebacker, under the safety, the only spot that your receiver can get. It was just, he had 2 or 3 throws that were awesome. And you now see why people were so excited about him a year ago. On top of that, the run game, which kind of suffered because people kind of realized last year that Drew Aller wasn't as good a quarterback as expected. 222 yards rushing, 5 yards per carry, 114 yards for Nick Singleton. So I don't want to oversell one game, but Penn State, they're all of a sudden very interesting. A lot of people thought this is a team that would take advantage of the 12-team playoff. They've been in the mix every year, couldn't quite get over that Ohio State, Michigan hump these last 3 or 4 years. Well, guess what? No Michigan on the schedule. No Oregon on the schedule. You get Ohio State at home. Even if you lose to Ohio State, you can go 10-2 and probably get into the playoff. So we'll see what happens. You don't want to oversell it, but very interesting schedule. The next 3 games are at home. Bowling Green, or next 4 games, are at home. Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, the UCLA Bruins as a Big Ten representative. Then you do have to go to USC, that big Saturday, October 12th game. But they should be 5-0 going into USC, and that's where the schedule gets interesting. 3 straight weeks, USC, bye, at Wisconsin, Ohio State at home. That's going to define their season. But listen, my old radio partner, Arnie Spanier, used to like to say, the show is tonight. I can only react to what I've seen so far this season, and Penn State exceeded my expectations. One team that maybe did not, it was a team that I thought might be a little bit better coming into the year than some, Michigan Wolverines. They beat Fresno 30-10. And if you only saw the final score, you'd say, okay, business as usual, no big deal, whatever. Sharon Moore, he's awesome, whatever. Here's the problem. It was 16-10 in the middle of the 4th quarter. Michigan finished with 269 yards of total offense. They scored 2 touchdowns in the final 6 or so minutes, including a pick-6 return for a touchdown. Michigan might have some more problems than I thought, and it obviously starts at the quarterback position. I know some people kind of in the building there, and they told me all fall long, we were waiting for this kid, Alex Orji, the presumed replacement for J.J. McCarthy. We were waiting and hoping that this was a kid that was going to step up, was going to take the next step. Doesn't appear as though he's done it. Again, doesn't mean he's a bad kid, doesn't mean he's a bad person, but they were waiting on him. It does not happen. He actually did not start the game. Davis Warren, a veteran who's been in the program there for a few years, actually did get the start, finished 15-25 passing, 118 yards. But listen, schedule is going to get tougher starting next week with Texas. Texas looked awesome on Saturday. And I'll tell you, I don't think there's very much confidence in that building about how they match up with Texas. We'll start previewing the week 2 games probably on Tuesday. But Michigan did not look great in their win. By the way, Oregon, how about Oregon struggling to put away Idaho? And this was a weird game. Oregon wins 24-14. But what's crazy is Oregon finished with almost 500 yards of total offense. Idaho with 217 yards of total offense. Oregon with 1 turnover. So it's not like they turned the ball over. It's not like they couldn't move the ball. They just couldn't put the ball in the end zone. They end up holding on to win 24-14. Interesting game next week. I hate this, by the way. It's a Peacock-only game, but they will play Boise State. Boise State is a team that many believe will be the group of 5 representative in that college football playoff. So, disappointing to say the least start. Disappointing start, but there's no reason to think that that things can't get better for Michigan. Really quickly, a couple of SEC scores of note. First of all, not sure if you saw this, Ole Miss 76-0 win over Furman. My Heisman Trophy pick, Jackson Dart, 5 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. Mississippi State wins 56-7. First game of the Jeff Lebby era. The days of being boring under Zach Arnett are at least over. You're going to be interesting if you are Mississippi State. So they get the win. Producer Matt's Auburn Tigers. Producer Matt almost didn't show up for work today. He is an Auburn alum. He was at the game, and he was up celebrating this 73-3 win over Alabama A&M. We got to talk off air about where did this 3 points come from? I mean, the program's slipping. But listen, we talked about this when Arkansas put up 70 on Thursday. I'm never going to discredit a team for taking care of business against an FCS opponent, a team that they should beat by 50, 60, 70. I'm never going to discredit them. So credit to Auburn, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas on Thursday. I should note, what a weird one in Lexington, Kentucky. Kroger Field, beautiful stadium. I've been there before. This one, because of weather, did not kick off until after 10 p.m. local time. Now, I'm not an expert on all these rules, but I'm pretty sure they had like another probably 35, 40 minutes to get that game started, or the game would not have been able to start by SEC rule. Well, they get it in. They're up 24-0 at halftime, come out for the second half, midway through the third quarter, another delay. The game gets called after 2.5 quarters. It was enough to be considered an official game, but Kentucky gets the win. Listen, credit where it's due. I was hesitant to buy into Kentucky because we bought into the quarterback situation last year with Devin Leary. I was guilty of it. I was one of the people saying, hey, he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks in college football. Did not work out. Well, Brock Vandagriff, who of course was the backup a year ago to Carson Beck at Georgia, he looked awesome. 12 of 18 passing, 3 touchdowns. They have the new OC at Kentucky. Now we'll see. Does Mark Stoops let the OC call plays, or does Mark Stoops try to reel things in like he's done in the past? I don't know, but got to give credit where it's due. Barian Brown, another guy who's as good as any wide receiver in college football, doesn't get the press that he deserves. 4 catches, 2 touchdowns in that one. And if you're Kentucky, it gets interesting really quick. You host South Carolina next week. South Carolina stinks. You also host Georgia 2 weeks from now. So you got to beat South Carolina. I think Kentucky's like a 7.5-point favorite in that one. But then Georgia comes to town 2 weeks from now for what should be a crazy, crazy, crazy Saturday night game. Really quickly, one last result I want to talk about. We've talked about all these SEC teams that beat up on a bunch of bad competition, but there is one more that I do want to talk about, and that is the Alabama Crimson Tide. They do take care of business. They do beat Western Kentucky 63-0. And I think if you're an Alabama fan, that's about as good as you could have expected coming into the first game of the Kalen Deboer era. Now, I'll be quick on this, but the bottom line is this. So people are going to say, Torres, why are you making a big deal of Alabama beating Western Kentucky? It's only Western Kentucky. Alabama is supposed to do this. Okay, yes, I get that. And I agree 100%. But at the same time, a couple things. One, you can sit there and say, well, it's Western Kentucky, you're supposed to win. Well, let's just go back to a year ago with this Alabama team. Now, granted, it was before Jalen Milroe was out for this game. We know why. But in the out-of-conference, they beat South Florida 17-3 in an out-of-conference game. So don't tell me it's only Western Kentucky. But 2, Alabama's the only program. We're going to spend a little bit more time on them because Alabama's the only program that lost the greatest coach in the history of college football in the offseason. And they're the only one that's been told the dynasty's dead. It's over. You guys stink. You're going to be terrible. You've been passed by this program, that program, this program, that program, whatever. And so forgive me for taking a second to acknowledge Alabama look like they are not going to miss a beat at all. First of all, again, you don't want to overreact to Western Kentucky, but there were a couple really positive signs. First of all, defense was awesome. And this, by the way, is part of the Kalen Deboer conversation that I think gets missed. And this is the part that I have discussed at length on this show, is that for anyone who's criticizing Alabama, okay, let's just think about it at the most basic level. Whether you like Alabama, hate Bama, whatever. Let's just talk about Deboer. Deboer last year went 14-1 and played for a national championship. You probably know that. He beat Dan Lanning twice. Maybe you remember that. He beat Steve Sarkisian in the playoff. By the way, the year before, beat Sark in the bowl game, beat Lanning in the regular season. So 2 guys that everybody said would have been a better fit at Alabama than him, he is 5-0 against in the last 2 years. Played for a national championship last year. But here is the thing that people forget. This roster that he has right now, this second, is the best roster that he's ever had. So he's coming off a 14-1 season, beats Lanning twice, beats Sark, and this is a better roster than he had a year ago. So I never bought this notion that Deboer was going to stink. Recruiting has been through the roof. We've talked about that all offseason. But then on top of that, think about what we saw on Saturday. I know you don't want to overreact. And I know Jalen Milroe only threw the ball 9 times. But Jalen Milroe looked confident. He looked poised. He looked like he didn't feel like he had to take off running every single time, although he did carry the ball plenty. But I bring it up because you look at Jalen Milroe. He looked confident, 7 of 9 passing, 200 yards. Ryan Williams, the true freshman, really, I thought an important recruit for Kalen Deboer, was committed to Bama. He wasn't a December signee. He was a February signee who reclassed. And so when Saban left, he was a kid that decommitted. And there was talk he was going to go to Auburn, talk he was going to go somewhere else. Well, he ends up staying at Alabama. He finishes with 2 touchdown catches. And then the defense, right? Because again, even if you think Deboer is a step up offensively, well, what's the defense going to look like? Defense holds Western Kentucky to 145 yards of total offense. By the way, Keon Sabb, a transfer from Michigan, a pair of interceptions. And so again, I don't want to oversell it, but you look at this Bama team, remember, best team that Kalen Deboer has ever had. I think he's already like a top 3 coach in college football. Obviously not going to put him ahead of Kirby Smart, but I think you could make an argument he's with anybody else. And you start to look at the schedule. And this is what I find so interesting about the schedule conversation, right? We look at it in June and July and it looks so daunting. Well, you go to Wisconsin in 2 weeks. Wisconsin struggled. Not saying that it's a gimme. Not saying that at all. But I'm saying Wisconsin did not look great. We'll see. South Carolina's on the schedule. They stink. Vanderbilt's on the schedule. They stink. Georgia, by the way, did not look unbeatable against Clemson. So I just bring it up because I thought it was a great effort on opening night by Alabama under Kalen Deboer. No, you don't want to oversell a single game against a bad opponent, but I do think that matters. Really quickly, producer Matt, we have any questions before we get out of here? Should mention, we will be back tonight after LSU USC recapping that game. So make sure you're plugged in if you're not subscribed. Matt, do we have any questions that are worth looking at real quick? Let's see. Eric, this is a great point by Eric, talking about the Notre Dame situation. Notre Dame should run the table and go 12-0. They only have 2 true road games remaining. 1, that's incredible. 2, that is why, again, I thought this game was important for Notre Dame. Because when you look at the schedule, it's very manageable, but there aren't a lot of great wins. And here's the other thing. Like he said, 3 true road games on the schedule. Now, they do play Georgia Tech in Atlanta. That's worth noting. They also play, who else they got? They got Navy somewhere, probably in New York somewhere. Overall, they have 3 neutral site games. And so, again, you look at that Notre Dame schedule, and all of a sudden, there's not a lot of great chances for big wins. And so this was a game you had to have. Credit to them. By the way, it is worth noting, I think everybody knows this, but they go 12-0. They cannot be higher than the 5th seed in the college football playoff because, again, the top 4 seeds that get the first round bye, they go exclusively to conference champions. But it's also worth noting, by the way, Notre Dame doesn't play in a conference, so they will get that conference championship weekend off. So they'll get 2 weeks of rest before a first round game. But this was a big one. It was a big one for Notre Dame. As Eric said, they should go 12-0. And I'm just here to say what I said earlier. If they had lost that game, I don't think 10-2 guarantees them a spot in the playoff. I don't think even 11-1 necessarily would, but they get the win, and that is a big one that's going to carry weight all year. What else we got, producer Matt? All right. So, Eric also points out my commentary about the Big Ten. He said Oregon struggled against Idaho. What a weird game that was. By the way, Oregon is my national runner-up to Georgia. He said Fresno State is a much better program and one of the top G5 schools. Michigan might not beat Texas, but could go 10-2. A totally valid point. I said in the preseason, by the way, I picked Michigan to make the college football playoff. That was a little bit of a bet against Penn State. But listen, you'd think they beat USC. Now, we'll see what USC looks like on Sunday night. For people listening on podcasts, we did record before the USC-LSU game. But we'll see what Michigan looks, or we'll see what USC looks like. But Michigan, to me, this is what I think their season comes down to. They play at Ohio State. They play Oregon at home. They play Texas in week 2 at home. You go 1-2 in those games, I think you're probably in the college football playoff. Now we'll see what happens with Penn State. See, maybe USC is a little bit better. Got to beat USC. But I think they're in at 10-2. You got to go 1-2 in those games. They will get credit for challenging themselves in the out of conference. If Oregon and Ohio State are awesome, they're not going to be penalized for that. They're going to be, rewarded if they have a win over one of them. So we'll see. And you're right. One game, Fresno State's good. They're tough. They got dudes, well-coached program. So I think that's a fair point by Eric. Maybe I was a little too critical of Michigan. I think you did want to see a little bit more out of the offense. But listen, remember, some of those Michigan games the last few years, even when Harbaugh was the coach, it's not about style points. It's about, to quote Mike Tyson, beating you into Bolivian and getting out with a win. Doesn't matter if it's 31-10, 24-6, and Michigan does get the win. Anything else before we get out of here? Hey, Aaron, watch the highlights from the Candy game. I assume that's probably Vandy. Learn some more about the makeup of their team. I don't know about dismissing them this early. I guess time will tell. So he said the Candy game. I assume that's Vanderbilt. And, it's interesting. Vanderbilt's tough because they lost a lot, not just from graduation, but through the portal. They lost A.J. Swan, their starting quarterback, is now at LSU. Couple other big names, Will Shepard, their leading wide receiver, is at Colorado. It's tough. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they looked really good on Saturday. Now I know it's an overtime win, so you're sitting there saying, "Well, how good could they really be?" Blah 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 blah. This and that. But listen, remember, this was a team that against a Virginia Tech team that everybody was excited about. Vandy was up 17-3 at the half. I think what's really intriguing about them is that their quarterback, Diego Pavia, I apologize if I screwed up his name. He was at New Mexico State the last couple of years, comes in, wins the starting job at Vanderbilt, and again, finishes with a very good game against Virginia Tech. I think you're probably right. Credit to the listener who just shared that comment. I think you're probably right. I think it's probably a little bit unfair of me to just chalk up Vanderbilt as a win for all these teams. They did go 5-7 2 years ago. And the thing about Vanderbilt, I hate to say it this way, it's going to sound negative. They never get anybody's best shot. They're always the game that you look ahead past them because you got Texas on the schedule or you got Georgia on the schedule or whoever. So I think they have a chance to sneak up on some people. They play Alcorn this week. They play Georgia State before they open at Missouri to open SEC play. And listen, remember, a few years ago, they beat Florida. A few years ago, they beat Kentucky. So maybe I am dismissing them too quickly. By the way, should say this really quick. Appreciate everybody's support. Think we got a great crowd for a Sunday afternoon on a holiday weekend. I know a lot of you probably getting ready for that USC LSU game later. But I am very genuinely surprised at how many people are tuning in here on a Sunday afternoon. Should mention, by the way, we will be doing probably on Sundays. We'll probably go live at 7 Eastern going forward. We're going to talk mostly college football, but obviously, nobody wants to compete with the NFL. So I think 7 Eastern will probably be the sweet spot where the late afternoon games are basically done. The Sunday night game hasn't really started yet. So make sure you're subscribed, all that good stuff. By the way, we crossed 43,000 subscribers on Saturday night. Cannot believe the interest and support for this show. Truly, truly, truly do appreciate that. Producer Matt, any other questions before we get out of here? Any comments, anything like that? Looks like we might be out of questions and comments. People, it was fun. It was fun. Great crowd for a Sunday afternoon. So I appreciate your support. I'll just browse the comments really quick. And again, I should mention, by the way, as you see, Collypuffs.com, our official partner, visit them, Collypuffs.com, the healthy alternative to snacking. I'm telling you, we got these in the Torres house. We go through them like crazy. They're delicious. They're healthy, great for your kids, great for your grandkids. They're back in school. You need something for that lunch box that isn't bad for them. Collie Puffs is the way to go. And that's it. I think that's it for this episode of the Air Torres Pod. I'll tell you, well, Ernest is saying, how come you're not talking about Ohio State? All I will say really quick, Ohio State, listen, Ryan Day, this is not the game that is going to define the season. They struggled a little bit early, but to their credit, pull away late, 52-6. I still, listen, I need to see a little bit more from Will Howard, but I thought he threw the ball pretty well. And Jeremiah Smith, to the point of earnest, looked awesome. Saturday afternoon, Jeremiah Smith, 6 catches, 92 yards, 2 touchdowns as a true freshman. Ohio State gets the win. And yeah, man. All right. I think that's it for this episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Do think it is time for me to go. Appreciate everybody's support. If you are not subscribed to the YouTube page, click the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. We passed 43,000 subscribers. I think we can get to 50,000 by the end of September, but cannot do it without your support. Tag a friend, tell a friend, be a friend, share with friends as well. Also, make sure that you're subscribed on podcast. Actually, you want to be a real good friend. Download the podcast. Download, rate, review, all that good stuff. But yeah, you guys get the point from here. I think it's time for me to get out of here. We've done an hour 10. What are we, about 5 hours from kickoff of the LSU USC game? We will be back after that game. By the way, my official best bet is USC plus 4.5. I think there's a chance USC pulls off the outright upset, but whatever happens, we will be back to discuss it all. Appreciate everybody's support. Appreciate you tuning in. We will be back, about 8 hours from now with a full recap